Hey y'all, how's it going? Welcome to the show. I'm Scott Horton. It's my show, The Scott Horton Show. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, man, so it should be a good show today. Hey, I'm writing an email. You just be patient. Today on the show, Eric Margulies and Gareth Porter, as per usual. But also, guess what? Iona Craig. And she wrote a thing for The Intercept that I want you all to read. So I'm going to have her on the show to talk about it. And then that way, maybe you'll be more likely to read it if you hear her talk. I don't know. Something like that. It was a very important story at The Intercept about America's war in Yemen. And, yeah. So, there you go. Mm-hmm. There you go. Margulies, he's going to be on about France and the terror war. Iona Craig on America and Saudi's war against the people of Yemen. All of them, I think. Except Al-Qaeda. Oh, no, them too. And Gareth Porter's going to be on also about the Islamic State and America's Syria policy, etc. His latest. Well, apparently the man got his voice back, which is nice. He had lost it there for a little while. But now it's there again. So, at least that's good. 4,000 interviews. You heard me say for a long time, almost 4,000 interviews, over 3,500 interviews, more and more interviews all the time. There's a big pile of interviews. It's now more than 4,000. Ding, 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 hooray, and yay, and confetti. Confetti. 4,000 interviews. Maybe I should quit now and go into business. I guess running a skate park, right? Then that way I can go out of business in like a year, but it'll be really a great year. That's what I want to do. I just don't have any money. Is it money you have a few tens of thousands of dollars I can borrow so I can rent a warehouse and fill it with mini ramps? Isn't that, at the end of the day, what we all really want out of life? A warehouse full of mini ramps? That's what I'm thinking. Anyway. Yeah. Don't you know there's a war on? I know. I got a job to do. But 4,000 interviews. I emailed Garrett this morning. I says, well, it's 4,000 interviews, so I ought to have you on for the celebration here, since he's the guy I've interviewed more than anybody. Although, Margulies and Giraldi are pretty close in second and third place there somewhere. One or the other. That's cool. All right, well, so yeah, lots of latest news. In the news, well, there's so much different stuff to talk about. But I guess, and this isn't just politics. It starts out about politics, but it's about more than politics. Donald Trump keeps doubling down on all of his anti-Muslim kookery and quackery. And this is the guy who really led the whole the birther movement for years, right? Which I think even the birchers said was stupid. Now that I think about it. The leader of the birther movement is the front runner for the Republican Party presidential nomination. And did you know at Real Clear Politics, they have him beating Hillary in the general, too. That's a real thing that could happen. This guy who has no principle whatsoever, who knows nothing, who cares about nothing except himself, believes in nothing except himself. I am the Senate. That kind of thing. That will be the presidency of this freak this lunatic, Donald Trump. And I think a reporter was trolling him and said, so you for making a database of all the Muslims in America? And he says, absolutely. Absolutely. How about making them wear identifying marks? Which, that's certainly trolling, right? That's trying to provoke Donald Trump into going, into outright adopting a policy of the Nazis and the yellow stars of David that they made Jews wear in Germany. And I guess probably the reporter was banking on Trump being so crass that he don't give a damn, or so stupid that he doesn't even know anything about the history of the Nazis or World War II or anything at all, and wouldn't even know that he was buying directly into a parallel of what Hitler did. And then his defenders say, yeah, but the reporter brought it up, not him. So? We're supposed to believe the president, the next president of the United States, well, he's helpless before the power of suggestion. If somebody asks him a question, obviously he has to say yes to whatever the question is. Huh? Couldn't say, no, we're not going to make a database of everybody who's a Muslim. No, we're not going to make them wear, symbols on their clothing to identify. I mean, that's crazy. This is America. Instead, he said, and this is a real quote, we are going to have to give up. Oh, and this is when they talked about closing down mosques. We are going to give up many of the privileges that we have had up until now. And that's what he's talking about. Freedom of religion. Free exercise of religion in America. That's not your right as a human being or even as an American. It's simply a privilege. A civil right agreed upon by different factions of the state. And they can change their mind when they feel like it. And now's the time. So, this goes out to all you Catholics and Baptists and Hindus and Episcopalians and Lutherans and Presbyterians. The Methodists, they got the biggest numbers. So, once you throw out that First Amendment, well, and I don't know if the Methodists got the numbers in Congress. Maybe the Catholics have I know the Catholics have the majority on the Supreme Court. The Catholics. I know Catholics are a majority on the Supreme Court. I don't know about in Congress. But, seems like people like, right-wing Southern Baptists would be the most in favor of outlawing Islam. But they're not the majority. They're not even the majority of Protestant Christians in this country. So careful what you wish for, folks. Who ever heard of the idea, right, that in order for you to be free, you've got to tolerate the choices and beliefs of others? Gee, I don't know, Scott Horton. What if people pick the wrong religion compared to the one that I think is the right one? Maybe the government should make them choose right instead. Hey, stop believing in Mohammed, you Mohammedan. Become a Baptist like me. We ought to hire the government to make them. Doesn't that make perfect sense? Close down their places of worship. This is the front runner, the Republican Party for the President of the United States right now. Really. Check it out at Real Clear Politics. The numbers there, man.
Don't you get sick of the Israel lobby trying to get us into more wars in the Middle East? Or always abusing Palestinians with your tax dollars? It once seemed like the lobby would always have full-spectrum dominance on the foreign policy discussion in D.C. But those days are over. The Council for the National Interest is the America Lobby, standing up and pushing back against the Israel lobby's undue influence on Capitol Hill. Go show some support at councilforthenationalinterest.org. That's councilforthenationalinterest.org.
Hey, all Scott here. If you're like me, you need coffee. Lots of it. And you probably prefer it tastes good, too. Well, let me tell you about Darren's Coffee Company at darrenscoffee.com. Darren Marion is a natural entrepreneur who decided to leave his corporate job and strike out on his own, making great coffee. And Darren's Coffee is now delivering right to your door. Darren gets his beans direct from farmers around the world. All specialty, premium grade with no filler. Hey, the man just wants everyone to have a chance to taste this great coffee. darrenscoffee.com. Use promo code Scott and you get free shipping. darrenscoffee.com.
All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. Rand Paul is losing. Someone was harassing me on Twitter last week going, oh, yeah, well, Rand Paul's on his way up now, pal. Look at it. He's gone from 2 to 3% in the most recent poll. Yeah, well, in these polls, he's all at 2%. Can I get a 3? Oh, there is a 1-3 in the ABC poll. And the rest of them, he's at 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. Total failure. Well, you know, the lesson of Ron Paul is that he was too good on everything. And so that was why he couldn't have power. And so the really super smart knows way better than his father, Rand Paul. He figured out the brilliant, genius chess-playing strategy that if only he runs as Jeb Bush, then everyone will like him. If only he runs as the defender of the status quo in virtually every way. That's how to fool the entire American right into supporting him. And then once he gets in power, he's going to reveal himself as secretly really Ron Paul in there all along. And then he's going to do just what you and me and Ron Paul would want him to do, Scott Horton, and you're just too dumb to see it. But Rand Paul, why, he's a super genius at politics. Remember that time he stabbed his father in the back? Because he did not have a shot, but someone told him he did, but he was stupid to think so for a minute, that he had a shot at Paul Ryan's losing spot on the losing Romney ticket in 2012. Oh, he's such a brilliant genius, Rand Paul. He's playing third-dimensional chess. He really thought that Mitt Romney was going to make him vice presidential nominee to lose? Which would have been a great honor, he said. Oh, that would be a great honor. So he stabbed his father in the back. When he never had a shot at that, obviously there's going to be Paul Ryan or somebody like that. Give me a break, idiot. Anyway, he's done nothing but fail. His father changed the entire world. His task was to pick up where his father left off. Just like his dad, only younger and in the Senate. And as a presidential candidate, wow, talk about teaching liberty to the people. Talk about teaching peace and real free market economics, not conservatism. Wow, what a great opportunity Ron Paul's son has to advance the American Revolution. Instead, he runs as Jeb Bush. Oh, he's a little bit less of a warmonger than Jeb, but I defy you to define the difference. Oh, he wants to bomb eastern Syria, but not western Syria. Is that it? Loser. Hillary with a perm. That's all he is. Imagine the son of a Paul completely ceding, deliberately, and completely ceding the outsider status in the presidential campaign to Donald Trump, the born billionaire from New York City. What a disgrace. And you know, don't you, what Rand Paul is thinking right now? Curses. If only I didn't have a libertarian for a father. Curses. If only I had never said anything good about anything. If only I was just like Jeb on all of it. Then they'd like me. Damn, why'd I have to even be good on the Patriot Act? That's what spoiled my chances right there. Meanwhile, he'd be turning the world upside down in the very best way. If only he would read his father's articles and paraphrase them. I mean, that's basically all he's got to do, is tell the simple truth. He doesn't have to wage a revolution. He just has to say things that are true and important. But he won't, because he sucks. What's that? You want me to be bad on Russia? Okay, I'll even be bad on Russia. Do you like me now? Nope, they still don't like you, Rand. You're even bad on Russia, and they still don't like you. What a disgrace. And I don't mind that people have not come to me in droves saying, hey, I'm sorry, you were right, and I called you a jerk, but you were right about Rand. I don't care about that. Because I'm proud to see that nobody supports him. The libertarian movement doesn't support him at all. The libertarian movement thinks he's a joke. There's like, you know, that's his 1%, is 1% of the libertarian movement. Answering yes in those polls. And not even them, I guess. Those are his constitutional conservatives from Kentucky. Is that where he gets the 1% from? I don't know. But I don't see the libertarian movement as behind him at all. And why would they be? And some people are, you know, later at coming over to the change than others, mostly just because of information. They go, wait a minute, he's bad on Guantanamo and Afghanistan and the Islamic State and Iran and Palestine and what? Guantanamo Bay, prison for life without trial? No. Yeah? Prison for life without trial? People who've already been cleared for release for years? All right, anyway, I'm sorry. Once I get started talking about how much I hate Rand Paul, sometimes I get a little carried away there. So, coming up, 3 interviews, so stay tuned for that. Here, Israel, report Israel has 115 nukes, 660 kilograms of plutonium. Nation's arsenal includes nuke-capable cruise missiles. According to David Albright, though, at the Institute for Telling Lies About Iran's Nuclear Program, so I don't know. I've double-checked this. It's hearsay, but it's the very best hearsay in the world, I think. And I've double-checked it over and over with Dan Ellsberg on this show. If you go back through the archives and listen for Dan Ellsberg interviews, you can find them. Where I ask him, are you sure about this? You told me this before. Am I sure I heard you right? Are you sure that's what you meant to say? And he says that Mordecai Vanunu, the Israeli nuclear weapons whistleblower, told him directly that Israel has as many as 600 nuclear weapons, including hydrogen bombs, thermonuclear bombs, which means they can either be huge numbers of tens of megatons, or they can be miniaturized to, for example, fit on cruise missiles and still pack a hell of a bang in them. And here's a new one, must be by Trevor Aronson here. Oh, good, with a co-writer here, Katie Galloway. Trevor Aronson, the heroic journalist, Trevor Aronson, from The Intercept, author of The Terror Factory, about all the bogus, trumped-up entrapment FBI prosecutions of the last decade. Here he is on some leftists, too. An FBI informant seduced Eric McDavid into a bomb plot, then the government lied about it. Brand new out at The Intercept today, the great Trevor Aronson. Back in a sec, y'all. Hey, Al Scott Horton here to tell you about this great new ebook by longtime Future Freedom author Scott McPherson. Freedom and Security, the Second Amendment and the Right to Keep and Bear Arms. This is the definitive principled case in favor of gun rights and against gun control. America is exceptional. Here the people come first, and we refuse to allow the state a monopoly on firearms. Our liberty depends on it. Get Scott McPherson's Freedom and Security, the Second Amendment and the Right to Keep and Bear Arms on Kindle at Amazon.com today.
Hey, I'll check out the audiobook of Lou Rockwell's Fascism versus Capitalism, narrated by me, Scott Horton, at audible.com. It's a great collection of his essays and speeches on the important tradition of liberty. From medieval history to the Ron Paul Revolution, Rockwell blasts our statist enemies, profiles our greatest libertarian heroes, and prescribes the path forward in the battle against Leviathan. Fascism versus Capitalism by Lou Rockwell for audiobook. Find it at Audible, Amazon, iTunes, or just click in the right margin of my website at scotthorton.org.
All right, you guys, welcome back. Oh, ear goggles on. I'm Scott Horton. It's my show, The Scott Horton Show. Oh, boy, I better hit the button to call the man, huh? Beasties. Yeah, I'm Scott Horton. It's my show, The Scott Horton Show. And on the line, I've got the great Eric Margulies, foreign correspondent. Eric Margulies, he's covered 14 wars and then some. Well, geez, must be 20 by now, whatever, something. Wars all over the place, and going back for decades. He's the author of War at the Top of the World and American Raj. That means empire, liberation, or domination. That's the book, American Raj. And he writes for LouRockwell.com and for his own website, ericmargulies.com. And this one is at unz.com, U-N-Z, unz.com. The first French massacre, giving us some history lessons here and some context for the current goings-on in Paris. Welcome back to the show, my friend. How are you?
Thank you, Scott. Glad to be back with you.
Good, good. Happy to have you here. So, yeah, everybody said this is the biggest massacre since World War II. And I saw a couple, it was Fisk, and then you noticed Fisk too. Said, slow down there, not quite so fast, because it turns out there's been more than 130 people killed at once in a massacre in Paris since World War II. One other time. What was that?
Well, that was in 1962. When the large number of Algerians, about 30,000, were demonstrating in Paris, and 61. They were demonstrating in Paris, and the Paris prefect, police commissioner Maurice Papon, unleashed his riot squads, tough, brutal police on the rioters. At least 200 were beaten to death. And many of them were thrown off the Pont Saint-Michel into the Seine River. And it was a huge massacre. It was covered up completely. Later French investigations only admitted to 40 dead, but there were bodies floating all over the Seine. It's an incontrovertible fact of history now.
That's amazing to me, even that any former Vichy police official would have been kept on in the government. You'd think they would have denazified any of the collaborators with the enemy during the war. They weren't purged. This guy was in charge of the police.
Well, that's right. The Vichy, pro-German Vichy regime, was very popular in France. And, it is looked back on many French as sort of a golden time in France. Anti-Semitism was extremely high in France. They equated Jewish people with communists. And so there were many leftovers of the Vichy days in France right up through the 1970s.
Oh, wow. Amazing. All right. So now, what's the problem with these Algerians? You know, the Vichy police official here, he must have had a good reason, like radical Islam made them do something horrible to the innocent, right?
That's right. They were horrible ipso facto because they were Muslims and Arabs. That already is enough reason to throw them in the Seine River. But this came at the end of the Algerian War for Independence, which began in the mid-1950s, an exceptionally bloody war where Algerians fought against French and each other, and there were 1 million French settlers known as Pieds Noirs, Blackfeet, who lived in North Africa, who violently opposed granting independence of Algeria. And this war dragged on until 1963 or 62, and an estimated up to 1 million Algerian Muslims died in this war, killed mostly by French security forces or by anti-French guerrillas.
All right, so now, and you talk about you were there in Paris when this massacre occurred, and you were there 6 months later when some right-wing fascists tried to do, well, apparently they were running around everywhere, but some of these guys tried to do a military coup d'etat against Charles de Gaulle because he was quitting Algeria.
That's correct. De Gaulle, the always courageous and brilliant de Gaulle, decided to buck the trend of the French history and end colonialism, end the affliction of Algeria. And he told the French people he was going to set Algeria, give it its independence. And in fact, a referendum was held, and over 70% of the French agreed. But a violent minority of settlers in Algeria and certain generals of the French army, in fact, 4 leading generals who had been retired by then, backed by the intelligence services, planned to stage a coup, take over the government. This was in 1962. I was in Paris. It was one of the most exciting things I've ever been to because the rebels were going to get aircraft, military aircraft, to fly the key elite units, paratroop units, and the French Foreign Legion, fly them to France, land, seize the key airports around Paris, and drive downtown and seize the government and install a military dictatorship. I was in the streets. I was off Place de la Concorde. I remember vividly. You hear all the radios going, and the paramilitary police there, heavily armed with submachine guns, were waiting for the fighting to begin. You didn't know what was going to happen one minute to the next. But finally, the French conscript forces, as opposed to the elite professional forces, refused to go along with the coup. Very important point. And then the French Air Force commanders refused to send their aircraft, and the coup fizzled. But it was a close-run thing. It was extremely exciting.
Well, I got to ask, what was the CIA's role in that? Don't tell me nothing.
Well, that's the subject of much debate. In fact, I'm just reading a new book called The Devil's Chessboard about this right-wing factions in the government back to the days of Eisenhower, who tried to influence policy. Certainly, there seems to be evidence that the CIA was in close touch with the French conspirators, and there was talk they wanted to oust de Gaulle because de Gaulle wanted an independent European policy. He refused to take orders from the Americans, and this enraged Washington, and they wanted to see de Gaulle overthrown.
Was he the one that pulled France out of NATO?
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
And the Americans were not going to forgive de Gaulle for this, but along came Mr. Sarkozy years later, who obediently put France back into NATO.
Mm-hmm. Oh, really? It took that long? I was wondering. I wasn't clear on when they finally rejoined. It wasn't until Sarkozy, huh?
Well, the French tiptoed into NATO. They had made all kinds of agreements with NATO, even though they were allegedly completely independent.
Imagine the nerve of them not wanting to die in thermonuclear fire just because Moscow and D.C. get into it.
It's just outrageous, those wicked French.
They declared independence. Get them!
That's right. And the U.S. was very afraid that France was going to influence the rest of Europe. There was considerable passion in Germany on this subject, as the former defense minister, Franz Josef Strauss, put it so beautifully. He said, "We won't be foot soldiers to the American atomic knights."
All right, y'all. That's Eric Margulies. Hold on the line. When we come back, we're going to get into some more current history here. The French messing around their former empire in the Levant and what it all means. It's the heroic Eric Margulies, author of American Raj. Check out his website, ericmargulies.com. Spell it like Margolis. Back in a sec.
Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for WallStreetWindow.com. Mike Swanson knows his stuff. He made a killing running his own hedge fund and always gets out of the stock market before the government-generated bubbles pop, which is, by the way, what he's doing right now, selling all his stocks and betting on gold and commodities. Sign up at wallstreetwindow.com and get real-time updates from Mike on all his market moves. It's hard to know how to protect your savings and earn a good return in an economy like this. Mike Swanson can help. Follow along on paper and see for yourself. wallstreetwindow.com. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for Liberty.me, the great libertarian social network. They've got all the social media bells and whistles. Plus, you get your own publishing site, and there are classes, shows, books, and resources of all kinds. And I host 2 shows on Liberty.me. Eye on the Empire with Liberty.me's Chief Liberty Officer Jeffrey Tucker every other Tuesday, and The Future of Freedom with FFF founder and president Jacob Hornberger every Thursday night, both at 8 Eastern. When you sign up, add me as a friend on there. ScottHorton.Liberty.me. Be free. Liberty.me. Okay, kids, welcome back. I'm Scott Horton. It's my show, The Scott Horton Show. I'm talking with the great Eric Margulies, author of American Raj, and this article, The First French Massacre at the Un's Review. Before that, The City of Light Falls Dark. And before that, A Vile Crime But Productive. That was the Islamic State attack on the Russian plane. Presumed, I guess I should say there. The seeming one. And now, so here's the deal, Eric Margulies. I cite you all the time for a lot of reasons, but lately, the one that I cite you on more than any other is, Eric Margulies said in the summer of 2011, he wrote it, and I interviewed him about it, that French special forces and spies are screwing around in Syria right now trying to drum up a revolution against Assad, an armed one. And in fact, I went back through the archives and I found one that was from, I think, September or October 2011. But I'm pretty sure the original report was July. So I need to go back and look again. But anyway, Phil Giraldi reported for antiwar.com and the American Conservative that December that Obama had signed 2 new findings, one for Syria, one for Iran, and that it was on. Pretty much everybody else never cites anything earlier than 2012 when it comes to American and CIA support for the Mujahideen war there, but I'm pretty sure you were first. And there was one other guy in the Observer, I think, too, who wrote a thing about Prince Bandar sending Mujahideen and money. But anyway, so this is the thing that TV news people just can't get their head around at all. That it's not just that France has been bombing the Islamic State for a year and a half, along with the Americans, although in Iraq, not Syria, but that doesn't make much difference to them. Oh man, now I forgot what I was going to say for a second. Let me see if I can think of it. They can't get their head around the idea that America and France, NATO and the GCC, they've been backing the Mujahideen, and including the factions that on Nusra Front that ended up splitting off and becoming the Islamic State. Nothing but Al-Qaeda in Iraq, the bad guys left over from the last war. And so TV news can never explain that we've been on both sides of this war now, and this is what has gotten France into this mess. And I'll say one more thing before I turn it over to you, which is, I don't know if you saw, but at The Guardian, they admitted publicly that they had a policy that banned any of their editorials from pointing to French intervention in Iraq and Syria for 3 days after the Paris attack because it might hurt people's feelings or something. And so instead, radical Islam did it became the narrative, and no one was allowed to contradict it, even in the liberal Guardian. So anyway, what do you make of the current, the backlash, the reaction to the attack, or maybe even the preceding policies that led to it?
Scott, as you quite rightly point out, France is mucking around in the Muslim world is virtually unknown. In the West, thanks to our lousy and biased media. The French, it's very interesting. France is now under a socialist government, and the French socialists have been the most imperially minded of the French governments, as opposed to the French conservatives or communists. And there seems to be a deep strain in the socialists that they want to restore France's very strong influence in the Levant, that is Lebanon, Syria, which were French colonies France created Lebanon, and in Iraq, which France was supposed to get Iraq at the end of World War I, but somehow the wicked British outmaneuvered the French, and they ended up with oil-rich Iraq, and the French have never forgiven the British for yearing them out of Iraq. Anyway, so France has permanent interests in the area, particularly so in Lebanon, where it's backed different factions. It's been very active in Mali, where we saw an attack over the weekend that was not apparently done by ISIS. And it is active. It supported the horrible government in Algeria, one of the most brutal military regimes, even worse than General Sisi's military dictatorship in Egypt, which is backed by the U.S. and France. But Algeria is the important determiner there. And of course, there are millions of Algerians or people of Algerian descent in France. Horrible bloody wars in Algeria. In the 1990s, the French helped crush a democratic government in Algeria. So France is deeply involved. They're in the Ivory Coast. They're in Togo. They're all over in Chad. And of course, the Americans are now in the same area too. We saw with the Mali hotel bombing, suddenly there were America's Special Forces troops there. So France is deeply involved, and it's what the British used to call the price of empire.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm reminded of this old Onion headline from, I think, 1901, supposedly, where it says, Zulus hold Queen of England at spear point. And it was all about the Africans invading England. And it was making a mockery of any pretense of defense on the part of the British, of course. And also just illustrating, that the reason that they were able to get away with empire is because their victims couldn't possibly fight back. And it seems like it's obviously the same kind of thing with the French and all their history, but old habits die real hard, even though now they can fight back. And they're not necessarily, in fact, they set off bombs within, 1 mile or so of the president of France who was attending the soccer match there or whatever. It's not quite holding the Queen at spear point, but pretty close. They can hit back, and especially when France has been helping build up this Mujahideen army for the last 4.5 years, and now they have to deal with it. It seems like they better be careful about what kind of fights they pick because, they might be able to take on Italy in a war or something. They're prepared for a fight like that, but they're not prepared for a fight against civilians who sneak in and then make bombs out of stuff under their mom's kitchen cabinet, Or grab a rifle and do a massacre of civilians at a restaurant. No one can prevent that.
Well, the Europe and the United States and Britain have been very fortunate in that the people who are attacking them, as in Paris, are actually rank amateurs. There's a huge outcry about the worldwide Islamic conspiracy and the tentacles reaching out from Raqqa, Syria, and all training camps and all this baloney. But in fact, these are a bunch of 20-something scruffy kids who are really very incompetent. They have not been properly trained. They're not properly armed. Otherwise, they could have done much more damage in both areas. So we're lucky in that sense. This is not a professional enemy. These guys, we're not fighting, for example, like the Chechens. When the Russians came in 1991, I think it was, and invaded Chechnya, which had declared independence. These Chechens were real fighters, real soldiers, and they beat the Red Army on the first Chechen War. We mustn't over-glamorize or overemphasize these rebels or whatever you want to call them, violent extremists. They are not efficient, not competent, but they are extremely useful to Western politicians.
Right.
The Pentagon will be asking for more money now. Hollande's standing in France is shot way up. The intelligence agencies are cracking down. They're a godsend, in a way, to the military police institutions.
Right, yeah, they will always exploit it as though they had done it themselves, because why wouldn't they? It's in their interest to do exactly what the terrorists want, which is overreact. I'll show you overreact, they all say, as they go into full effect there. And at the same time, though, it shows that one handful of boobs, as you described them, can cause a hell of a lot of problems. 130 dead, and in a way where, presumably it's going to depress tourism a little bit, create a little, actually quite a bit more of a police state on the streets of France. I guess we'll see how temporary, troops on the street and door-to-door searches and all these kinds of things are. But, and this has been said all along, right? As long as America's over there continually intervening, and France for that matter, creating more and more terrorists, it isn't hard for anybody with an imagination to see what a determined young man with a rifle can get away with to cause a major reaction. Just find a crowd, and then, of unarmed people. That's pretty damn easy. Could have been hijack a truck and crash it into something or anything,
Unfortunately, that is what's happening, and you have to be willing to die for your cause. That's really the most important thing with these young extremists.
Yeah.
They know they're going to get killed, just the way Palestinians know when they attack Israelis with knives and things, that they're going to be shot down in the streets.
Yep. All right, now let me keep you over for just 1 minute. Is that all right?
Yes, sure.
Time goes so fast, so I'm trying to talk with you here. And it's because I talk so much is probably the problem. But anyway, I want you to hear this clip, mostly just because it's funny, and I want your reaction to it. It's Hillary Clinton after her horrifying speech at the Council on Foreign Relations. She sat down to a little bit of question and answer, and this is, I'm pretty certain it's Fareed Zakaria, but there's another guy that looks kind of like him from a distance, so I'm not sure, but I think she even says Fareed. Yes, Fareed Zakaria. He frames the question really well about what we're doing in Syria and why, and leaves her with basically no real answer except what sounds to me like a very planned answer, and I want to get your reaction to it. So here's the audio here.
Let me ask a follow-up on that, Madam Secretary. If the only way you can put together a moderate Syrian force is by having the United States cajole, bribe, arm, and train it, we are then looking for this force to defeat ISIS, then defeat Assad, then defeat al-Nusra, then defeat other al-Qaeda affiliates, keep at bay the Shiite militias and Hezbollah, take control of Damascus, and establish a pluralistic democracy in Syria. Isn't that kind of a tall order?
Well, it's certainly described like that. And that's why I focused on ISIS. I mean, because I think right now we have one overriding goal, as I outlined. We need to crush their territorial domain, and we need to try
anyway,
to...
So she goes on from there to say priorities. In other words, we're not going after Assad anymore because ISIS, now finally, not after the fall of Mosul and the declaration of the Caliphate, but now because Paris, we're finally reorienting the ship of the empire here, and we're going to betray al-Qaeda again and side with Assad against them again. Is that pretty much how you read that? And do you think that's even really true, or she's just saying that?
Well, the stupidity and contradictions of our policies in the Levant have become too glaring to avoid. Of course, we should never have tried to overthrow the Assad government. It was a de facto American ally. It was one of these corks in the bottle, the way Saddam Hussein was and Gaddafi was, that were repressing the Islamic militants, and trying to overthrow him has led to this catastrophe in the region. So it's right. We should, in my view, I've said all along, we should be working with Assad to fight these different groups. But if we send our forces and you don't go into a war without having clear political objectives, and we don't have clear political objectives in that region, we don't know what the hell we want to do once we conquer all this empty desert. We have to work out our policy objectives, and there are too many competing influences in Washington for us to do it right now.
Yep. All right. Well, listen, thank you very much for coming back on the show, Eric. I sure appreciate it.
My pleasure, as always.
All right, y'all, that is the great Eric Margolis. He's at ericmargolis.com, spell it like Margolis. Also at lourockwell.com and unz.com, U-N-Z, unz.com. This one is called The First French Massacre, and we'll be right back with Iona Craig in just a sec.
Hey, Al Scott here. If you've got a band, a business, a cause, or campaign, and you need stickers to help promote, check out thebumpersticker.com at thebumpersticker.com. They digitally print with solvent ink, so you get the photo quality results of digital with the strength and durability of old-style screen printing. I'm sure glad I sold thebumpersticker.com to Rick back when. He's made a hell of a great company out of it, and there are thousands of satisfied customers who agree with me, too. Let thebumpersticker.com help you get the word out. That's thebumpersticker.com at thebumpersticker.com. You hate government, one of them libertarian types, or maybe you just can't stand the president, gun grabbers, or warmongers. Me too. That's why I invented LibertyStickers.com. Well, Rick owns it now, and I didn't make up all of them, but still, if you're driving around and want to tell everyone else how wrong their politics are, there's only one place to go. LibertyStickers.com has got your bumper covered. Left, right, libertarian, empire, police, state, founders quotes, central banking. Yes, bumper stickers about central banking. Lots of them. And, well, everything that matters. LibertyStickers.com. Everyone else's stickers suck.
All right, you guys, welcome back. I'm Scott Horton, and it's my show, The Scott Horton Show. Our next guest today is Iona Craig, writing for The Intercept at theintercept.com. She was based in Yemen from 2010 to 2015 for the Sunday Times, and she's also written for the Irish Times, the LA Times, Al Jazeera, BBC, etc., and won the Gellhorn Award for her coverage on the covert war in Yemen. And I realize now there's an archive of Intercept articles here I need to go back through. But this one is U.S. and Saudi bombs target Yemen's ancient heritage. It's also called The Agony of Sada. We ran it about a week ago or so on antiwar.com. Welcome to the show, Iona. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm very good. How are you?
I'm doing really good. I appreciate you joining us here today. Great work here. Before we talk about the real tragedy and the destruction of the heritage, whatever you call it, of the people of Yemen, we got to first talk about the people of Yemen, because as tragic as a lot of the effect of this is, it's still come, on the structural history here, still a second place to the human beings being killed now. And boy, are they being killed by America and Saudi Arabia in Yemen right now. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the figures are now 5,700 since March, but I mean, that's a gross underestimation. That's only figures of people that have died in hospitals, when the vast amount of the population can't even get medical care, can't get to the hospitals because of the war. And even from the airstrikes that I've seen, people are being buried literally where they're dying at the site of strikes, or bodies are being taken straight to the cemetery. So, yes, even the figures that we're hearing about will only represent a fraction of the real number of people are being killed. And, I tried to point to that in the piece, as devastating as it is that the heritage is being destroyed. Really, everybody in Yemen is just struggling to survive on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, so we've heard from the beginning of this war back in March that, hey, this is the poorest country in the Middle East, and they're virtually entirely dependent on imports for their food. And, in fact, I spoke with an expert on the show named Martha Mundy, or Mundy, you may know her, who I didn't get a chance to get into it with her, but she at least hinted at the past of IMF, World Bank shenanigans being behind the destruction of whatever Yemeni agriculture ever used to thrive, and making them so dependent on foreign imports for their food resources in the first place. But it's kind of been said all along for almost a year now, 3/4 of a year, that these people are going to starve to death under this blockade. And so I gotta wonder about that. Here we are, the end of November. Who's left alive, or people are making do, or somebody's rationing something? The Houthis are passing out wheat to somebody. The Red Cross got through somehow, or what? Tell me.
So yeah, Yemen relies, on importing 90% of its food. But what's really been happening now, the Saudi imposed blockade, which is being supported by the US and the UK, by the way, has all but brought an end to commercial imports. But at the same time, because of the pressure really from the international community and the humanitarian organizations, they're letting in a trickle. So it's just enough to stop the whole thing falling off the cliff edge, but at the same time, not enough to stop people from dying, and children particularly dying from malnutrition. The UN just put out its report yesterday on food security in Yemen. And in the one province they were able to gather hospital intake data, showed a 4-fold increase in child malnutrition. So that's an indication that this is a very slow burning situation. Yes, a lot of the humanitarian organizations thought that the situation was going to be a hell of a lot worse by now. But Yemenis are very resilient. You've got to understand that they've never really had a state to rely on in the first place. So they've always been extremely good at looking after each other. They've got a very strong sense of community. This tribal culture means that everybody in a village will try and look after their neighbors and share what food and supplies they have to look after their community. So yes, what's happening now is with this blockade, there is enough getting through, whether it be legally through aid agencies, there is a very small fraction of commercial goods getting through, or by smuggling, that is enough to stop this mass famine scenario that the UN, the United Nations, is predicting at the moment. So it's becoming very slow burning. So you're not going to see it visibly like you'd imagine the 1980s style Ethiopia scenario of refugee camps with thousands of starving people. Mm-hmm. You've got to remember in Yemen, the majority of the population lives in very remote rural areas. So you're not going to see it en masse like that. It's going to be creeping famine out in the mountains, out in rural places, and we'll probably never get to see it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and speaking of creeping, is there any end in sight to this war, whether from the Saudi or the Houthi side actually having a victory and winning the war, or some kind of peace talks that both sides are willing to participate in, or any kind of end in sight?
Well, I think, as we all know with modern war these days, what does winning look like? But yes, there are attempts to negotiate a political settlement. They haven't got very far. There were talks in Geneva earlier this year, and both sides, being the president's side, President Hadi, who is currently in exile in Saudi Arabia, and the Houthis, who are supported by the former president, Saleh, they didn't even meet in the same room. So they are trying again. They hope to, maybe by the end of this month, beginning of December, to meet again, either in Geneva probably, or possibly in Oman, to try and reconvene those talks. But that's a long way off reaching a settlement. And even if they reach an agreement, it's actually implementing it. And you have to remember that Saudi Arabia isn't actually involved directly in those talks either. And of course, they play a huge role in whether this war continues or whether it stops. So right. Yes, the UN special envoy has been running around doing shuttle diplomacy, trying to get the sides to meet. But all indications are on the ground that this war will continue until particularly Saudi Arabia can at least make something of what they think is going to look like a win out of it, for face-saving purposes, if nothing else.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess there really is no indication so far of the Saudis backing down from their insistence that Hadi must retake the throne and rule all of Yemen, right? No hint toward maybe breaking the country back up into 2 or 3 or...
No, not at the moment. I mean, in effect, it's already doing that itself. So in the south, you have got Hadi or the coalition in control in the southern city of Aden, which they have now renamed the temporary capital. Mm-hmm. And up in the north, in Sana'a, the capital, is where the Houthis are. So it's almost like 2 countries now anyway. It's very difficult if you're going from the south to the north, because you're basically having to cross the front lines. And having to explain yourself to one side or the other why you've been in the north or the south. It's almost like North and South Korea in that respect. It's kind of crazy when you're trying to navigate the country now. Yeah. There is no sign of the Saudis backing down on that, of Hadi coming back. Although how legitimate he is, I think, is hugely debatable, bearing in mind he was voted in a one-man election, and then extended his term after that. And he's really politically a dead man walking. Neither side is willing to support him, and you'll struggle to find any fighters on the grounds who are actually fighting for President Hadi at this point.
Mm-hmm. Are you surprised that the Houthis were able to come all the way and take the capital city and hold it all this time?
Yes, initially, but when you watched it happening, I was in Sana'a when they came and took the city in September. And although there was sort of 4 days of fighting, one of the major military camps to the north, in the north of the city, they then took the entire capital in a matter of hours without a shot being fired. And that was all down to the support of the former president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, and his loyalists within the military, who basically helped the Houthis along. And there's no way the Houthis would have been able to get to where they've got today without that support from Ali Abdullah Saleh's loyalists.
Their old enemy, Saleh, who they fought 4 times or more. Wait, hold it right there. We got to take this break. We'll be right back, everybody, with Iona Craig writing at The Intercept. U.S. and Saudi bombs target Yemen's ancient heritage.
Hey, Scott Horton here to tell you about this great new book by Michael Swanson, The War State. In The War State, Swanson examines how Presidents Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy both expanded and fought to limit the rise of the new national security state after World War II. If this nation is ever to live up to its creed of liberty and prosperity for everyone, we are going to have to abolish the empire. Know your enemy. Get The War State by Michael Swanson. It's available at your local bookstore or at Amazon.com in Kindle or in paperback. Just click the book in the right margin at scotthorton.org or thewarstate.com. Hey, Scott Horton here. It's always safe to say that one should keep at least some of your savings in precious metals as a hedge against inflation. And if this economy ever does heat back up and the banks start expanding credit, rising prices could make metals a very profitable bet. Since 1977, Robertson Roberts Brokerage Inc. has been helping people buy and sell gold, silver, platinum, and palladium, and they do it well. They're fast, reliable, and trusted for more than 35 years. And they take Bitcoin. Call Robertson Roberts at 1-800-874-9760 or stop by rrbi.co.
All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton, talking with Iona Craig from The Intercept about the catastrophe in Yemen, that is the American-Saudi war against the people of Yemen. Her piece is called U.S. and Saudi Bombs Target Yemen's Ancient Heritage. And, wow, do I really read you right here, Iona, that they're bombing and destroying cities that are 3,000 years old and even older than that?
Yes. I mean, even Sana'a, the capital, and the local legend has it that it was founded by Shem, the son of Noah. You know, the history in Yemen goes back a long, long way, pre-Islamic and pre-Christian. And some of those sites that, you know, not even the most hardened traveler has ever got to see in Yemen. And, you know, there have been archaeologists and teams out there that have been doing a lot of work in previous years to restore those sites. And all that work has been undone now because of this bombing.
It's amazing to even consider, and of course, you know, I'm an American and it's a very young country here. But it's amazing to read about houses where families have lived, where, you know, fathers pass the house down to their son, that kind of thing, for hundreds and hundreds of years on end. These are the houses that America is destroying. And they're killing people. I'm not trying to play down the killing of people, but you got to take time. I'm glad you did in this article. We got to take time to play up the destruction of the ancient heritage of the human race here. And for what? To put Hadi on the throne in a fight that can't be won? That's already proven to have failed? It's crazy.
I think I think the thing I was trying to illustrate here is that, yes, they're buildings, but they're so intertwined in the culture and people's lives. They, like you say, the same families have been living in them for generations and generations, and with many of them, that's their only possession. You know, that is what is they would sell if they needed to, the land that it's sitting on, and also the skills that goes into building those homes, and it's also particularly tragic when they do bomb those houses, because if you're inside, you are much more likely to die when one of those is bombed than a modern concrete house. I've seen the difference, when a modern concrete house is pancaked, it'll be at the point of where the bomb hits in the middle of the building. And if you're lucky and you're at the outside, the whole of the building is probably not going to collapse, depending on the size of the bomb used. Whereas in these old mud houses, which are sort of anywhere between 7 and 10 stories high, which I lived in for 4 years, by the way, when a bomb hits one of those, because they're made of mud, the whole thing will collapse. And many of the people that die are suffocating because of the dust and the mud that goes up, and they will die from suffocation when that building comes down, and the whole thing will crumble. So you're losing these beautiful old buildings, but also the risk to people when they're inside them when those bombs hit is so much greater than if you're in a modernly constructed house.
Man. And, the thing is, too, is all we got to do is stop for a second and think, what if it was China that was doing this? What would the American media say about it? Those, savage Oriental barbarians of the East who would destroy humanity's heritage in this way and blah, blah, blah. To no end, they'd be crying about it. But, hey, whatever, red, white, and blue's behind it. And, in fact, I don't know exactly how it is, in the UK, but in America, nobody ever even heard of the Yemen war. They don't cover it. Not even on the Laird News Hour do they, the serious one for college graduates. They never talk about it. Nobody talks about it. It's not even a news story.
Yeah, I think this is also the problem with Yemen. I mean, it was always the case. I've been covering the country for 5 years now, and getting interest in Yemen beyond Al Qaeda was always a struggle. But now I think people are perhaps a little war weary, particularly in the Middle East, with so much conflict going on. But also, it's extremely difficult for journalists, international journalists, to get in the country. And even once they do get in the country through the blockade, they're not being welcomed with open arms by the authorities, particularly in Sana'a, by the Houthis at the moment either. They're making it extremely difficult for journalists. The risks are very high. And I think when it becomes, hard work or risky for a lot of the mainstream networks, they're just not going to touch it. And unfortunately, actually, in the last few weeks, there was an American who was in detention who died whilst he was being held. And there has been something of a witch hunt for American nationals in the capital in Sana'a in the last couple of weeks. So that really puts people off wanting to travel to the country to try and cover the story as well. So yeah, it's as hard as it is getting food in there and getting medical supplies into everybody. It's just as hard getting the information out as well. So yeah, and of course that's convenient for both America and the UK. This is a war they're supporting, both with intelligence, with bombs, with refueling of planes. And so it's convenient for both the American and the British governments when this story is not being covered, because it becomes incredibly awkward for the American and British governments when they have to face questions about large numbers of civilian casualties that are being caused by their own weaponry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and the next time AQAP or some other group, maybe the Houthis this time, or somebody tries to send someone to attack the United States, the American people will wonder, well, why? It must be because radical Islam made them do it, because what has America ever done to Yemen? Because our government and our media just won't talk about it at all. And in fact, speaking of which, I meant to ask you earlier about gains. Any gains made by Al-Qaeda on the ground since the start of this war, since America started attacking their worst enemies, the Houthis, for them?
Well, yeah, this is where it gets complicated in Yemen. To be fair to the Houthis, although they have this slogan, death to America, death to Israel, they have never actually posed, any threats internationally outside of Yemen's borders. And although I say, they've been throwing Americans in prison, they have never carried out or looked to carry out any attacks, whether it be against the American embassy or anything like that in Yemen. But on Al-Qaeda, yeah, I mean, Al-Qaeda took control of the southern city of Mokalla in April, so just 1 month into the war. American drone strikes have continued. They've kind of not been at the same level as they were before, but they did take out a significant number of leaders this year, actually. More leaders of the group than they have done in the last 5 years, since AQAP became what it is today in 2009. But yeah, the group is, if anything, is getting stronger, but because of the conflict, they are now putting themselves up as the frontline defense against the Houthi expansion. The Houthis are predominantly Shia fighters, although not all, because of course they've got Saleh loyalists with them who are a mix. But Al-Qaeda certainly puts up the sectarian narrative and says that they're the main line of defense against them. And so, yeah, they're building relationships with local tribes that they otherwise wouldn't have done because Hadi's army collapsed. And really, the only people the tribes had really as an ally when Al-Qaeda came along and said, we'll help you. Some of them didn't have a lot of choice in that matter, because there was nobody else that was going to fight with them. So yeah, it's meant that Al-Qaeda's got stronger, and we've also seen the emergence of Islamic State, in Yemen over the last year. But I also have to point out that the rise of those two groups during a time of war is not totally detached from the political conflict that's going on in the country. Certainly Al-Qaeda has been used by the political elite in the past as a stick to beat other groups and their opponents with, as well as to beat America with in order to get more money out of them. Right. So yes, they are not totally independent of the political power struggle, and I can't imagine that Islamic State is immune from that either, because I can't see that it's a coincidence that they have kind of suddenly emerged over the same period as this civil war has gone on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems this whole time both sides, the Al-Qaeda guys and the Houthis, do nothing but grow stronger and stronger anytime anybody attacks them. So when they go to their ultimate clash, I guess we'll see what happens then. But so far, war is the health of both of their states.
Yeah, sure. I mean, they have been fighting each other on the ground, but now there's this proliferation of weapons, of course. Some of those have been going into the hands of Al-Qaeda as well, certainly. Not only the arms drops that the Saudis were doing, Al-Qaeda have got hold of some of those weapons, but even Islamic State, they carried out a major suicide attack in Aden at the beginning of October, and they were using the armored vehicles that the United Arab Emirates had shipped in July. And, you know, we saw this with Islamic State in Iraq and then Syria doing the same by using American vehicles that they'd got their hands on, and the exact same has happened in Yemen.
Yeah. All right, so well, that is Iona Craig, writing for The Intercept, previously for the London Times, and she's the winner of the Gellhorn Prize, and I think when you read this one, you'll see why. It's called U.S. and Saudi Bombs Target Yemen's Ancient Heritage. I really hope you guys will take a look at it. Thanks very much, Iona. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here. Are you a libertarian and or peacenik? Live in North America? If you want, you can hire me to come and give a speech to your group. I'm good on the terror war and intervention, civil liberties stuff, blaming Woodrow Wilson for everything bad in the world, Iran, central banking, political realignment, and, well, you know, everything. I can teach markets to liberals and peace to the right. Just watch me. Check out scotthorton.org/speeches for some examples, and email me, scott@scotthorton.org, for more information. See you there. Hey, Scott Horton here for MPV Engineering. This isn't for all of you, but for high-end contractors specializing in industrial construction and end users who own and operate industrial equipment. MPV offers licensed professional consulting on chemical and mechanical engineering for your projects. Tanks, pressure vessels, piping, heat exchangers, HVAC equipment, chemical reactors for oil companies or manufacturing facilities, as well as project management support and troubleshooting for those implementing designs. MPV will get your industrial project up and running. Head over to mpvengineering.com.
All right, y'all, welcome back. I was telling y'all earlier, it's now 4,000 interviews. I bring that up, it's 4,000 and something. And in fact, I think actually there are quite a few missing that are on antiwar.com that for some reason have never been put on my own site. Whatever. Anyway, for all I know, it's 5,000, but I don't think so. Anyway, 4,000 and something interviews. scotthorton.org. They're supposedly all there in MP3 format for you. Let me know if you find any dead links. Anyway, the point being, 4,000 interviews, and approximately 2,000 of them are of our good friend Gareth Porter. Welcome back to the show, Gareth. How are you doing?
Hi, Scott. How are you? Of course, I know you were exaggerating for effect.
Yeah, okay, but It is hundreds, and I think a couple hundred. The last time I counted, it was 150. But that was because it would automatically put the number at the end. It would say Anti-War Radio, Gareth Porter, number 149, or whatever. But then we changed the title system to where now they have dates in the titles, so that means it's not a clone of the same title again and again and again, so it doesn't keep count the way it used to before.
It's kind of you to make this point, and of course I'm honored that you've wanted to interview me so often. Thanks.
Well, you write a lot of stuff. The thing is, and I told this story before, the first time I interviewed you was in January of 2007, and Bush and Cheney were talking about maybe they were going to bomb Iran because not Saudi backing al-Qaeda in Iraq and the Sunni-based insurgency, but Iran that was backing all the same factions we were backing, while they were the ones who were responsible for everything that had gone wrong in the Iraq war. And maybe we needed to bomb the Quds Force bases and this kind of thing. And you came on the show and said, nah, don't worry about that. If they do it, it won't be till the summertime. And here's how I know. And you were saying what no one else was saying. And of course you were right. And it came to a head that summer. And thankfully anti-war forces prevailed. But anyway, that was why I started interviewing you, is because you had the X-ray eyes to read through a lot of lines in order to decipher what was really going on here. And what was really going on here was at least that we had time before it came down to it. So anyway, and then I've interviewed you 1,000 times since then, mostly over Iran's nuclear program, which you eventually finally wrote the book on, which everyone should read. It's called Manufactured Crisis. It's now mostly sort of kind of been put to bed, I hope, for a while, anyway, with the new nuclear deal. But anyway, the point is you're a great journalist, and I like interviewing you because you know so much stuff. This article is called How Terror in Paris Calls for Revising U.S. Syria Policy. And I ask you, what's Syria policy?
Yeah, I mean, this is a good question. And, the answer is it's a Syria policy that is so full of contradictions and ambiguities that it is literally impossible to really describe it, in any coherent way. I think that it's, and this is a theme that we've gone over, or I've gone over, I know many times on your show. It's the product to a great extent of Obama's response to domestic political pressures or perceived pressures or domestic political considerations, perhaps is a better way of putting it. But definitely, there are things about the policy that are difficult to make sense of. And I'm still trying to do that. I mean, for one thing, I'm still trying to understand why the Obama administration is so eager to please the Saudis, so unwilling to do anything or say anything that contradicts the Saudi efforts in either Yemen or in Syria. And I think this is something I'm going to continue to be writing about, and I'm still trying to solve that puzzle.
Well, yeah, it's a mystery to me. It seems like any one of these American presidents could tell the Saudis to go to hell. What difference would it make if they did?
Well, I think Obama is unique in this regard. I mean, I think it's true that previous presidents would have been unwilling to tolerate what Obama has not only tolerated but really supported over the past 3 years, and so it does pose a political conundrum here to understand this. I think part of the answer is definitely, and I'm going to be writing about this soon, that Obama is feeling particularly feeling the necessity, particularly to support the Saudis in Syria, because he has been so unwilling to have U.S. boots on the ground, or even to carry out any military attack in the air against Assad. And so he is. His view is that we need the Saudis to be in there instead of Americans. He said that in his famous interview or infamous interview with Tom Friedman. something to the effect that, why can't we have Arab boots on the ground in these wars? Now, somebody pointed out to me the other day, that, he couldn't have meant the Saudis because they're so incapable of actually having combat troops on the ground. And that's a fair point to make. But I think what he meant by that was the Saudis involved, deeply through their relationships with their allies, their Arab allies in Syria, and that's the equivalent, therefore, of deeper American direct involvement.
I'm sorry, you lost me. Are we talking about pretending to fight the Islamic State, or we're still talking about overthrowing Bashar al-Assad?
Yeah, I mean, in this case, more the latter, for sure.
Yeah, so he's saying, let's work with the Saudis more to back Arar al-Sham and al-Nusra against Assad and the Islamic State still in November 2015, not their redirecting.
Absolutely. I mean, this has emerged as quite an explicit policy now, particularly in light of these, what I've called the sham, peace negotiations, or the sham peace conference on Syria, because the plan is clearly to absolutely rely on the support for Arar al-Sham in particular, and even al-Nusra to some extent, to put sufficient pressure on the Syrian government to get an agreement that there'll be a transitional government, and that Assad will eventually step down.
Yeah. Now, so that's the only difference. Maybe they're willing to budge a little bit from getting rid of him at the beginning or getting rid of him at the end, or they still never will. That's
the major evolutionary change in U.S. policy, that now the U.S. is willing to support a settlement in which Assad could remain in power for, they're saying 6 months. Obviously, that's negotiable. They could extend the period, but that it must be part of a transition.
Now, do they mean a transition away from the entire Alawite-led regime? Or what are they talking about? Because that would mean the end of the entire state structure as it exists, wouldn't it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I have to say that there's a lot of ambiguity about that. But I think they're trying to have it both ways. They're trying to argue that, well, of course, we have to have a secular government, and they've been explicit about that. A secular government in Syria, that means, that's a code word, I think, for protection of minority interests, including the Alawites, on one hand, and on the other hand, that has to be a government in which the Sunnis have a fair representation, and that's going to be the crucial part of that they're going to sponsor in this transition.
Boy, are we 4.5 years into this war for that to all work out. I guess we'll see. Hang on one sec, y'all. We're going to talk more with Gareth Porter on the other side of this break. It's the Scott Horton Show.
Hey, y'all, Scott here for Samurai Tech Academy at MasterSamuraiTech.com. Modern appliance repair requires true technicians who can troubleshoot their high-tech electronics. If you're young and looking to make some real money, or you've been at it a while and just need to keep your skills up to date, Samurai Tech Academy teaches it all. And they'll also show you the business, how to own and run your own. Take a free sample course to see how easily you can learn appliance repair from MasterSamuraiTech.com. Use coupon code Scott Horton for 10% off any course or set of courses at MasterSamuraiTech.com. Hey, y'all, guess what? You can now order transcripts of any interview I've done for the incredibly reasonable price of $2.50 each. Listen, finding a good transcriptionist is near impossible, but I've got one now. Just go to scotthorton.org/transcripts, enter the name and date of the interview you want written up, click the PayPal button, and I'll have it in your email in 72 hours max. You don't need a PayPal account to do this. Man, I'm really going to have to learn how to talk more good. That's scotthorton.org/transcripts.
All right, guys, welcome back. So it's taking so dang long here. All right, we're talking about Syria with the great Gareth Porter here. So we got special forces embedded with the Kurds, who are the enemies of our allies, the Turks. And I read in a couple of places, Garrett, that they're going to embed some special forces with the Army of Conquest, too, which puts them in the line of fire of the Russians, who are there for the same reason that we supposedly are there now, to fight the Islamic State.
I haven't seen that. Where did you see a report to that effect?
I'll have to find it for you. It was sketchy. It was an implication more than a...
yeah, I wouldn't trust that.
You think they're only embedding them with the Kurds and not with their Arab groups?
They're not going to do that.
Why not? I mean, Charles Lister wrote about how the Saudis and the Americans have a, quote, room in Turkey where they run the al-Nusra Front and the Army of Conquest. They're the commanders of it.
Well, I think there's a nuance there that's being dropped. I think what Lister was saying was that the Americans, as I recall what he said, I can check this later, was that the Americans in that operations room had encouraged some of the groups, some of the rebel groups that had been supported by the U.S. to go ahead and join in with the Army of Conquest. And that was after the capture of Idlib. It started in April of 2015. So you can check me and see if I'm correct about that. That's my recollection. So, I think the Americans are not going to be directly, assisting al-Nusra Front in an army of conquest, a war plan. I think it's going to be more indirect. I think, they're counting on it, as I said, as a form of pressure. Definitely they're letting the Saudis continue their policy of direct support. And I reported, as I think you probably will remember, earlier this year, that a very well-placed Saudi source told me that the Saudis were providing 40% of all the military necessities of the Army of Conquest.
Well, and this includes, am I right, new rounds of TOW missiles hitting the battlefield there in the hands of the Al-Qaeda guys?
Well, as far as I know, the Saudis have not gone off the reservation themselves and provided TOW missiles. This is something, legally they can't do. The TOW missiles, let me put it this way. The TOW missiles cannot be provided to anyone without U.S. support, without U.S. approval, And so far, the indications are that all the TOW missiles have been have gone to places that the United States approved. Now, I don't know specifically all the specific names of the brigades that have gotten TOW missiles, so I can't precisely say. None of those are now directly under al-Nusra control. But I think it's more, that they're part of a coalition with al-Nusra Front, or part of the command that the al-Nusra Front clearly is the dominant factor in. Mm-hmm. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah. Well, I guess so. It seems to me like once Ahrar al-Sham and whatever other groups joined up with the al-Nusra Front in the so-called Army of Conquest, then, they just renamed al-Nusra and these groups joined it. Or no? That's still plausible deniability to give TOW missiles to some of them, but not the other ones in the same group together.
Well, I think that the United States is going to make clearly distinctions between al-Nusra Front and other organizations, and by doing so, they feel that
even within the Army of Conquest, you're saying?
Within the Army of Conquest, exactly, yes. And there's something called the Islamic Front, which Ahrar al-Sham is the nominal as well as the real force in. Ahrar al-Sham actually has more troops apparently than al-Nusra Front. They are a larger military force. al-Nusra Front, and they are the ones who dominate this Islamic front, and al-Nusra Front is not part of it. And I think that, that's an arrangement which is aimed at making it more acceptable for the United States, to say, yeah, it's fine to provide weapons to anybody who's part of that front because it's not part of al-Nusra. Mm-hmm. So, I think there's a dodge going on. There's a major political dodge going on here. No question about it. And I think that's really essential to understanding, as far as we can, what the Americans are up to here.
Yeah. It's amazing that even this far into it, and even after all the refugee crisis is hitting all the European countries and everything, they still are willing to just continue the current policy and not try very hard to get over the hurdles and really have some kind of peaceful resolution as soon as possible, however soon that could be.
Well, when you start talking about a peaceful resolution of this conflict, I mean, even John Kerry, who is, has a pretty long record of saying things that, just are BS, about Syria. He is admitting publicly that, we're not close, really to a breakthrough here. He's also making statements suggesting that, just give us a little bit more time. But he has said, in recent days, in the last week or 10 days, that, the peace is not around the corner, in Syria. And, so again, this is part of the Obama administration's playing, verbal games with the American people. But, they appear to be trying to go into a phase of these talks, these negotiations, where what is supposed to happen is that the group of outside powers are going to decide who is a terrorist and who isn't, and those who are deemed kosher, if you will, if I may use that term under the circumstances, will be allowed to enter into the transitional government and be part of the power structure.
That's going to be so funny when they include Al-Qaeda, because after all, if they can treat them at Israeli hospitals, then they must be kosher.
Well, actually, they've already publicly said, no, al-Nusra Front is not acceptable. Al-Qaeda's Syria organization is not going to be an acceptable partner. They do not qualify. They are terrorists. In fact, al-Nusra Front helped them out by, made it easier for them to take that position, or made it more difficult to take a different position by recently approving the terror attacks in Paris, believe it or not. And this was despite the fact that they were supposedly carrying out a charm offensive last summer. I'm sure you remember this spring and summer. They were trying to present themselves as a moderate alternative to ISIS. So anyway, this is by way of saying that, no, al-Nusra is not going to be approved. They've already leaked that. But what is interesting is that everybody else, is fair game. Arar al-Sham, all the other folks who are allied with al-Nusra Front, who are in the same command, structure and who fight alongside them, those people are going to be waved on through, according to, the best, analysis that I've seen of this so far.
Well, and then, but the joke is, what's Arar al-Sham going to do? They're going to make a deal with America and Hezbollah and Russia and everybody. Hey, turn your speakers down a little bit, would you? I think it's your speakers.
Sorry, my speaker, you mean?
Yeah, I think they might be a little too loud.
Hold on. I'll do that.
Yeah. What are they going to do then? Arar al-Sham is going to make a deal. They're all going to meet in Switzerland, come to a pact with Assad and America and Russia and whoever. And then what are they going to do about the al-Nusra Front and the Islamic State? Just because we make friends with some of the Mujahideen, they're going to help us get rid of the rest? How could they?
Well, exactly. That's not going to happen at all. We know that perfectly well. And so do the designers of this crazy notion. I mean, the whole thing is sheer fantasy. it doesn't connect with reality, and that's what it really throws me for a bit of a loss to understand. Apart from just sheer public relations saying, "Oh, look here, we're working for peace," and that could be the easy explanation. How they feel they can get away with this, I don't know, because it doesn't add up to any formula that makes the least sense in terms of the real forces at work in Syria. I mean, it's not going to accomplish anything. It's not going to get the Syrian government to make concessions because they can see what's going on. I mean, bring in the jihadists into your government with al-Nusra Front still outside but allied with the same folks that are inside. No, of course that's not going to happen. So I don't know what they expect to result from this, except some very shallow, meaningless public relations value.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, man. Bill Kristol said this was a good idea, so maybe if we just hang in there.
Yeah, I mean,
the
Israelis are all,
man.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, no, sorry, I was just joking. We got to see it through and don't change horses in midstream. And see if I can come up with some other cliches. Anyway. Hey, you do great work. Thanks for joining me for episode 4000 and something here, Gareth.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Scott.
Appreciate it. That's the great Gareth Porter, everybody. He wrote the book Manufactured Crisis, all about Iran's nuclear program. I think you should read it, and I think you should check out his archive, if you want to, at middleeasti.net. This one is called How Terror in Paris Calls for Revising U.S. Syria Policy. Overtime. See you tomorrow.